Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and welcome to the second edition in the President Circle online series, Conversations with President Novak. I'm Kitty Allen. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement. Today, we are grateful to be joined by Don Hedrick, a Dakota Wesleyan graduate of the class of 2002. Don began his career with the Rapid City Police Department as a patrol officer. Throughout his 18-year career, he has continued to rise through the department and was ultimately named Chief of Police on August 17th of this year. Don's work has been recognized nationally through various honors, including being named a Bloomberg Fellow in the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where he is working on his PhD in public health. We are privileged to have him today to join us today to talk about policing in the wake of some high-profile cases that have generated a great deal of interest throughout the country. We'll talk with Don about his leadership in the time of uncertainty and a variety of other topics. For those of you who are joining us live, I want to provide a few guidelines for the conversation. You are welcome to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of the screen. At the 30-minute mark, President Novak will pose some of the submitted questions. We will conclude today's session at 12:45. This conversation will be recorded for those who are unable to join us live. So with that being said, I'm happy to welcome President Amy Novak and Don Hedrick to the continuation of the series, Conversations with President Novak.
Thank you, Kitty, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today. We're excited to have this conversation with an alum. And I'm going to just begin by asking Don to share with us a little bit about how he ended up at Dakota Wesleyan.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. And President Novak, I just got to say, I've followed you on Twitter here recently, and I just appreciate all the great things you're doing for Dakota Wesleyan. So thank you as well. You know, my story in regards to Dakota Wesleyan, for those of you who know and remember, Coach Joe Kramer was probably one of the main driving factors that brought me to Mitchell, that brought me to Dakota Wesleyan. We ran the wing T offense, which was a staple for him and at my high school, and he recruited me pretty heavily to come to Dakota Wesleyan. And I can tell you I visited a bunch of other schools, a bunch of other universities, and no other place felt more like home than DWU. I mean, people looked you in the eye, they shook your hand, they wanted to get to know you as a person. And, you know, after seeing the other schools, there was no comparison in my mind.
Very good. So you've been now in the police force after leaving Dakota Wesleyan. You entered the police force out in Rapid City, and you've been in that role, in a variety of roles actually in the Rapid City Police Department, now as chief. For the past 18 years, though, you've been in criminal justice in some form or another. What do you most enjoy about your work, and what do you find most challenging?
So my job is pretty unique, and police work is unique. But I think what I most enjoy would be the feeling of truly helping those in need and truly making the community a better place. And I can give you a real quick example. You know, very recently we had an event that we've held downtown prior to the pandemic where many people showed up. It was kind of a sort of a street dance in a way. And we found that we had juveniles that were showing up and just causing some mischief, you know, getting into scuffles and such. And just the simple act of a few police officers bringing a basketball hoop and a basketball down to that event and engaging the youth, it was an amazing experience because, you know, we took kiddos that were causing problems and we were able to turn that into a positive police interaction. And they went home and told their family they played basketball with a police officer. And just a simple act like that spiraled into a community event where the community took this over. And, you know, now we have a police athletic league. And programs like that just really make you feel like you truly are making positive change. You know, in regards to challenges, I think employee wellness, specifically police officer wellness, is very much concern at this moment with everything going on in our nation, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, and the summer we went through was challenging for a lot of different ways in regards to civil unrest and defund the police. And it wears on our officers. And so I think progressive police departments need to make sure that they're taking care of their officers. Healthy, happy police officers serve the community in a more efficient and effective way. Really it's on us to make sure that we have support systems in place to make sure that we're keeping our officers healthy and happy. And it takes a very special person to do this job. I mean, to get spit on or kicked, and you're working holidays and weekends and such, we got to make sure that we're protecting folks that are doing this work. And also I'm concerned, I want to make sure that we continue to have good people in police departments. Now more than ever, we got to make sure we have the right folks. So one, it's retaining the good people that we have, and two, making sure that we're attracting the highest caliber of candidates.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, there was a lot of civil unrest this summer and a lot of calls to defund the police or to look at new approaches to policing. What's your response to some of that? From your perspective, what are the best ways that we can prepare police, and how do we respond to those calls to defund efforts?
Well, I think it comes down to a couple things. One, I think times have changed. I think police departments need to be as transparent as they possibly can. I think the days of nothing to see here, move it along, official police business, those are long gone. The public demands to know what you're doing and why. And sometimes that's a challenge because you're working through an active investigation or you're trying to protect a victim. But I think we need to continue to look at things in regards to what can we share. And I say that because it helps to build trust. And, trust is fragile in this moment, but it starts with police departments being transparent. And so, this summer when we had activism and protests and civil unrest, even here in our city, we tried really hard to engage folks, engage the community, and open our doors and say, look, here's what we're doing and here's why. And here's our rules and procedures manual. It's out here online, take a look at it. And tried to even open our doors for meetings to talk and sit down and have a discussion as opposed to yelling at each other in the streets. For us here in Rapid City, we had a certain level of comfort with the way we're doing business. The Rapid City Police Department is an accredited agency, and that accreditation, really what that means is we voluntarily put ourselves through a third-party review of our policies, practices, procedures to make sure that we're utilizing best practices in law enforcement. So, many of the calls from the community to ask us to make sure that we were banning chokeholds or that we had a de-escalation policy, we already had that stuff in place and had been practicing it for years. So, for us, I think that was an extreme level of comfort of being able to share, yep, you're right. We need to only use chokeholds in extreme measures, and here's our policy that shows that's what we're doing and why. And I think, folks just want that reassurance that their police department is training in the proper way and following best practices. So we tried hard to be transparent with all of that.
I know there's been considerable discussion about trying to help police or make police aware of their inherent biases or the bias that they may bring to a particular situation. Can you talk about ways in which you might be trying to help train police officers to avoid discrimination or bias in their practice?
Yeah, we go through, per our accreditation, we have implicit bias training that we have to go through, but I think it almost goes a little bit deeper for us here locally and in South Dakota, and specifically in Rapid City. Not so long ago, we had some very terrible things that happened here. And you want to talk about boarding schools or the Wounded Knee massacre. And some of that historical trauma and distrust is still very real in our community, just as real as you and I speaking. Mm-hmm. And, I think about many years ago when I was a brand new officer, I really hadn't had a lot of engagement or experience with people of color, or especially the Native American population. And, you know, here in Rapid City, we have a very large Native American population. And I would show up to a call for service. So somebody would call the police department, ask for our help, and then I had to work through this layer of distrust just to get the person help that they had called and asked for. And I thought, even back then, I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could just skip straight to helping this person and not having to work through the distrust? And I say all of that to explain that in the last couple of years, we've really stepped outside of our element, and we've leaned on experts in our region. We've leaned on Lakota elders. We've leaned on Native American historians to help bring us a historical trauma training, to help us understand, you know, what happened, the facts of history, you know, how it caused trauma, how it has been passed down. And I think for us, that's important, because when we deal with somebody out on the street that is instantly upset or, distrustful of what we're trying to do, it allows the officer to acknowledge what's happening and take a step back and realize that, you know, there's some de-escalation that needs to occur here. And without that, you know, you encounter somebody that's very upset immediately and you don't have an understanding of what's going on, you know, the potential exists that things would get escalated instead of de-escalated without this knowledge. So, you know, we've been doing that for several years now. I wish this training would have existed when I was a brand new police officer, but I believe we're putting our officers in a better position than what I was in 18 years ago.
Sure, I appreciate that. I'm going to switch a little bit here to your role as a leader. Share with me, in your mind, what does good leadership look like? And in what ways do you try and model that in your new role?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I think very early on, I think some of my leadership values came from watching my parents. You know, we grew up very humble. I'll just say it, we grew up pretty poor. And I watched them, despite having illness. My mom has a very serious disease. I mean, I watched them go to work every single day, regardless of the external factors, regardless of being sick. There was no sick day. And, you know, I bring that with me, seeing their work ethic. And, you know, I think one other good example of leadership that I try and exemplify, you know, not so long ago, we had a little thing called Winter Storm Atlas hit us out here and, you know, dropped tons of feet of snow and completely crippled our community. But at the same time, we still had calls for service coming in, and some calls that, you know, we had to try and figure out a way to get people help. You know, somebody calling saying, hey, my oxygen tank is running out. Well, we better figure this out. So, you know, we had several of our command staff members that were, of course, snowed in and trapped at home. And, you know, I'm stuck at work at this point for many days, but I watched them. They didn't have a way to get in. So while many people were sitting by the fireplace reading about leadership, these men and women put on their snowshoes and walked through the elements to work to get people help and get things, you know, try to get things back to normal. And I just think of some of those extraordinary efforts where you have folks doing whatever they can to help the people that they're there to support. And I think I try to model that as best I can. And you know, honestly, if you're doing the right things for the right reasons, that tends to shake out, and people will follow an individual that's doing things like that.
Absolutely. I appreciate hearing those stories. I think that's probably a credit to you, but also to others in your line of work who model that, putting others first as sort of a strategy for their leadership. I know that you talked about Rapid City struggling this summer, and all communities across this country have had a challenge, both with the pandemic, racial unrest, etc. But where do you see resilience and hope playing out in the community?
Well, for me, honestly, what drives me to come back to work every single day, despite this being probably the most challenging year I can ever think of, would be, wanting a better place for my family and the families that we serve. And really what that gets down to is a better future for our kids. And I think there's a lot of resiliency in youth, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work with the youth for this vision of a better community. One example that we have here is, it's a very simplistic type of program, but it's a nationally recognized program called Handle with Care. And it's something we're in the process of implementing. And it's an example of, an officer goes to a call for service in the middle of the night and they witness a kid who has experienced trauma. Well, really what the officer will do from there is connect up with not only the school counselors, but also social service providers to get in touch with this kiddo and try and figure out ways to, help them and help the family to reduce that trauma and potentially break cycles of negative patterns that could exist from that encounter. And, we didn't create this program, but we've seen benefits in other communities, and it's something that we're right in the middle of implementing right now. So that would be an example of resiliency and hope in this 2020 that we're dealing with.
Right, absolutely. I know that, these are times of uncertainty, and those types of initiatives where we see glimmers of hope, I think, are so very important. But in these uncertain moments, has anything become more clear to you about your community or our country or our world? And what do you think it is that we're going to need to work on as we come through the pandemic?
Well, I think we are very divided in this moment, unfortunately. And I think, people are under a lot of stress. We see it here in our own lives. We see it with the people that we work with. Nobody planned to go through a pandemic and to alter the way their life is going in every sort of way. It's caused a lot of stress. It's caused uncertainty. And I think it has helped to bolster some of the divisiveness that we're seeing here. I think right now I'm looking forward to a brighter 2021. I think people need to focus on kindness. It is so crucial, and it's something that gets forgotten. I think it was probably our kindergarten teachers, one of the first thing they ingrained would be, this kindness factor. And we need to get back to that. We need to get back to giving folks a little bit of compassion and maybe forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And, these aren't weak traits. These are the traits that are going to pull us forward and move us ahead. And, also I think if there's an upside to any of this, I can tell you here internally at our department, it's made us much more adaptable and more resilient, because, we've had to really alter literally every single component of the way we've responded to calls for service. And not only to make sure that, we're keeping the public safe, but we're also keeping ourselves safe so that we can continue to help the people in our community. If we're all sick, we can't do that. Mm-hmm. And, I think in hindsight, we're going to look back and realize, this was a challenge and we worked through it, and we are more adaptable and resilient afterwards.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I think one of the remarkable facts of you right now, Don, is that on top of really doing progressive police work in Rapid City, you're also a Bloomberg Fellow at Johns Hopkins, and you're working on a PhD in public health. Tell us a little bit about what led you to pursue this opportunity, and what are you working on?
Well, also I think some of this goes back to my family. Although my folks didn't go to college, they really understood the value of education, and it was something that was driven home to me very early on. You can go through a rough period, you could lose money, you could lose your house, but you'll never lose education. And I just look at this as a way to bring best practices from other communities back here to our community. You know, I think it's okay to take a look around and see what other folks are doing. And hey, that idea might work well here. We should try it. And I think that's, you know, if I bring up that handle with care example, that's something I learned from my studies at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. So, you know, I think what really got me into it was a drive to figure out new ways and new approaches here locally. And it's been pretty amazing already. I've been able to connect with some very high caliber people and been able to just share ideas at that level. And I think it's going to be a benefit to our community in the long run.
You talked a little bit about de-escalation as a practice and as a strategy. Are you seeing those kinds of initiatives embraced across the police environment, across the country? And in what ways have you taken learning from other colleagues that you might be working with on this to bring those types of ideas to Rapid City?
Well, okay, I'm like pat myself on the back here, or pat our department on the back, I should say. The Rapid City Police Department and the Pennington County Sheriff's Office were the first agencies in the state to bring a formal de-escalation crisis intervention training to South Dakota. And this, we're talking years ago, back in 2007 is when this sort of kicked off. But, you know, really what that relates to is we took a look around, we found out what best practices were. You know, you would think that de-escalating and talking with people would have been like one of the top priorities at a police academy to learn those things, because you're going to be talking and dealing with people every call for service. But there wasn't necessarily something formal in place. So we did our research. We went to Minnesota. We basically stole their de-escalation crisis intervention training and brought it back here locally. And I think, you know, it was new. It took a little bit of selling. I think, you know, some of the old school police officers saw that as a very soft approach. But once they saw it in action, and once they saw that officers had the ability to talk someone into getting into a car as opposed to physically dragging them, which isn't good for anybody, once they saw the benefit, it really went well. And I think it branched out from there. You know, our next step with that training program is we brought it to our police academy saying, hey, look, this is important. Here's why. And by the way, we'll help you do it. We'll send our officers to provide this training for every officer in the state, because we thought it was just that important. And since then, the state has taken that over. It's a primary component of law enforcement training. And, you know, if you can't tell, we're proud of that, because it was, you know, another example of the ability for us to affect positive change, not only for our department, but for the state.
I know in our private discussions previous to this, you talked about just the important role that mentors played in your life and actually how they inspired you to the role you're in today. What advice would you give to people who are exploring, whether it's students or perhaps, you know, people looking at a career change, exploring a role in criminal justice or in policing? What kind of advice would you offer them today?
I would say, you know, get into the profession by meeting people that are actually doing it and seeing it firsthand for yourself if possible. You know, I think there's this version of what people believe police work to be. You see it on TV, you know, it's hood slides and chasing bank robbers and such. And, you know, while some of that action might happen, by far, you know, police officers today are doing much more social work in some way, shape, or form, it seems like. And I think you're only going to get a real feel for that if you're out seeing it for yourself and engaging with folks that are doing the job. It's probably the best way to learn if this is a fit for you or not.
When you think back early to your time here at Dakota Wesleyan, could you share with us some moments when you decided this might be a fit for me? And what was it about that experience that maybe shifted your trajectory toward the role you're in today?
Are you talking Dakota Wesleyan a fit for me or
No,
police?
I'm talking about the police force. Didn't you have an opportunity at one point to ride along with someone and really learn about what policing was all about?
Yes. So my story was a little bit unique in that I can remember being about to graduate from Dakota Wesleyan, and my advisor, Mike McGreevy, he pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, what are you going to do with your life?" And I said, "I'm honestly not sure." And, I maybe had kind of thought I would look at law school or something at some point, but I didn't have a clear path, and it was causing me a little bit of anxiety. He said, "Hey, you just missed a really nice guy from Rapid City. You should give him a call." And I was like, Rapid City, like city of Rapid City? He's like, "No, Rapid City Police Department." And I took the phone number and I kind of thought about it, and it was probably one of the first moments I took a serious look at police work. And, I had been studying criminal justice, and I thought, why not? What's it hurt to give somebody a call? And this police recruiter was over an hour down the road, past Chamberlain already. And, he took my call and he turned all the way around and came back to Mitchell to meet with me. And that was the first impression I got. And I think in my mind, I had this vision of what a police officer was supposed to be like. And I don't know why I had this, but I thought maybe, a police officer was supposed to be kind of older and crabby and, maybe had a mustache or something. And, and I'm kind of joking, but I kind of had that in my mind. And I met this officer, and he was friendly and upbeat and positive and just wanted to make our community a better place. And I thought, you know what, maybe I can do this. So I came out to Rapid City. I did a couple ride-alongs, and I saw the job firsthand, and I was hooked. I knew right there that this is what I wanted to do. And I saw, I saw the behind the scenes of police work, and I saw the ability to affect positive change. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And that's how I got here.
That's great. Maybe share with us the best piece of advice you've received.
Okay. Do I have time for a real quick story?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have plenty of time. We're good.
Okay, good. So, when I was in training, we really were harped on, for good reason, to treat everybody with respect. No matter what, treat them with respect. Even if you're getting punched, resolve the situation, but then treat them with respect. And it was just kind of ingrained. And, I'm so glad I took that message to heart for a lot of different reasons. But, this is kind of unique. It was about 12 years ago. I was on vacation. A group of us went to Mexico, south of Cancun, and spent a week there. And, it's the end of the trip, and you're tired and you're ready to go home. You're sunburned, and you're not really thinking about anything other than like this flight and getting home and getting back into the swing of things. And so we jump into this minivan, which is our cab, to get back to the airport. It's about an hour drive through the middle of nowhere, through the jungle, to get to the airport. And, I'm not in police mode at all. I'm very checked out. And my buddy nudges me, and he had caught on that the driver of this cab was staring up at me quite frequently in the rearview mirror. And so to break the awkward tension, we started asking some generic questions and such, and he wasn't having it. And he said, "I remember you." And he's looking right at me in the rearview mirror, and we're kind of like, okay. And he's like, "Yeah, Rapid City. How's Rapid City doing?" And at this point, this guy clearly knows who I am and what I do for a living, and which led to more awkward silence. And finally, as to our happiness, we get to the airport safely. But as we get out of the vehicle, he pulls me aside and says, "Look, that was the worst day of my life when I ran into you. I just appreciate the respect that you showed me. Your partner was a total jerk, but I remember that. And, thank you for what you do. And, it changed my life for the better." And so we had this discussion, and while still I have no idea who this person was or But he remembered me, and on the flight on the way home, I started to remember this interaction I had with him, and it wasn't positive. He had fought with a significant other. A knife was involved. We wrestled with him in the alley. But in the end, you know, I treated him like a human and treated him with respect. And I just share that story because of, if you think about the astronomical odds of all the cab drivers in Mexico, I ran into that guy, and you know, so I guess I tell that whole long story to explain how you should always be respectful.
Absolutely. I appreciate that's a great story. And in so many ways it reflects just how small our world is. And many times we don't realize where that face is going to reappear or where that individual is going to be reappearing. And so always honoring people where they're at, I think, is pivotal. And you've clearly demonstrated that. We have a couple of questions from those who are attending the webinar, and I'd like to ask those to you. The first one is, we know that there are sort of groups promoting white supremacy or white racist groups that are now considered a terrorist threat. How is the Rapid City Police Department approaching the threat of these types of groups?
Well, you know, if we get some sort of threat like that, we will handle that like any other terrorist threat that we would encounter. And you know, we've had those in the past where they popped up, or we'll see messages of hate. And I think for us, it's important to figure out, you know, what specific crime is occurring, and then dig into it and try and figure out who is responsible for it. And, you know, we have a pretty thorough investigative unit here at our department, which we're lucky. I recognize not all departments have the ability to do that. But also, when you're dealing with hate groups, it's important that we bring in our federal partners, because a lot of times hate groups aren't just connected locally. A lot of times there's a nationwide connection between entities like that. So, you know, I think for us, it's taking threats like that seriously and really doing what we can to figure out who, what, where, why, and what can we do to prevent any further violence from occurring. And I say that also, I have to say that we haven't seen any solid examples of specific hate crime like that here, you know, in recently. But you know, I think it's just important that if we do see a threat like that, that we take it serious.
Absolutely. Another question here: what are you looking for in successful officer candidates, and in what way does a college degree play a role in making those candidates successful?
That's a good question, and I appreciate that. I think what we look for here, you know, to get in the door here at the Rapid City Police Department, you have to have either 64 credit hours, or prior law enforcement experience, or full-time military experience, or a combination thereof. And, you know, what that means is we hold our candidates to a higher standard than some other departments. You have to have, you know, some life experience or some education under your belt. And, you know, folks that have been through higher education have an understanding of, you know, how you see the world in a different way, you know. But I also have to add that, you know, we have people working here that were former pastors, that were former teachers. So it's not so much the specific degree itself, it's that you have that life experience and you know, a broader view of the world. And for us, that's important. We demand that of our candidates. But one thing that really puts some candidates above others, for me and for our department, would be you know, the candidate being able to provide an example of community service of some kind, because that's truly what you're getting into when you're doing police work. You're here to serve. You're putting the community first. And if somebody can come in and explain how they've done that, or maybe it's volunteer work that they've done, maybe it's military experience, you know, that's something that's going to hold that candidate above others that don't have that experience under their belt.
Very good. And I think, as you mentioned, just those life experiences, whether it was in the classroom, there's such a role for all of those service professions to understand the diverse group of people that come before them, and they can bring those attributes to the force, as you mentioned. We have another question here. It's with the continued talk of defunding police, there is strength gaining in the idea of not sending law enforcement to matters such as domestic assaults. How do you see the defunding movements affecting things like responses to those types of incidences? And also, how do you see defunding affecting recruitment of suitable police candidates?
Yeah, you know, as I had mentioned, this is a challenging year, and the defunding topic, you know, has the potential for officers to feel some negativity from the community that they're serving. But I think when we get to defunding, I think it's important to talk about, you know, if you're going to cut a program, we have to make sure that we have something else in place to existing and operating prior to doing so. And, you know, I can give you one example. Here locally, there's been discussion about our response to homelessness, and specifically the police response. And for many years, we've relied traditionally on the jail to deal with issues of homelessness or low-level crimes like consuming alcohol. And we found that to be ineffective and costly, and the jail does not treat the underlying root issues when you're talking about these very you know, impacting community issues like homelessness or alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
And so in recent years, we've developed a quality of life unit that goes out and meets homeless individuals on their ground. And then these officers do what they can to connect that person with service providers. You know, we don't have a lot of social workers that are out on the bike path meeting with people. And, you know, we've tried to be that conduit where we've tried to connect people that need help with the people that can provide it. And that's went pretty well. But, you know, folks have said, why are the police doing that? Why, you know, is that your job? Is that your business? And the true answer might be no, but in this moment, nobody else is doing it. And we've found that if we aren't there to help connect those services, you know, we see the negative effect afterwards, where an individual gets too intoxicated, or they commit a crime afterwards, or worse yet, they lay down by the creek and never wake up. And if we're not out there engaging, you know, we see what can happen. So I say all that to say that, you know, if we were to cut our quality of life unit, for example, it would be the people that need it the most that would suffer, because there's not something else in place to help them. And so, you know, we've recognized that this is a little bit outside of the traditional police model. And so really, you know, this summer we've focused hard on collaborating with the community, collaborating with these service providers, and figuring out, hey, we're going out today on the creek. Will you come with us? Mm-hmm. You know, will you physically come with us? And you know, we've moved people outside of their element slightly with that approach, but it's a step in the direction of having service providers take some of this off of the police, the traditional police role. So, you know, I would say if you're going to defund something or take a program away, just make sure that you're not inadvertently hurting vulnerable people that it might be serving.
Absolutely. I so appreciate just your leadership, your honesty, and your transparency as you've discussed all of these questions. What do you do to nurture yourself? What keeps you going?
Oh, that's important. You know, when you have a very high stress job, it's so crucial that you balance that with physical exercise. Like, you just have to do it. You got to keep the machine going so that you can continue to help others. And I think of the analogy of, you know, we've all heard it a million times when you jump on a plane and they're explaining what to do, and you're being told to put your mask on first so that you can help those around you. And I kind of see it that way, that every now and then I have to just leave on my lunch break and go for a run to get my mind right so I can come back and be in a good frame to help others. And, you know, I think in line with that, downtime is so important for, you know, our officers. we got to make sure our folks are using that vacation because it helps keep you healthy and happy, and thereby you're able to continue to serve others. So, recognizing that maintenance and care is crucial, and we really do what we can to encourage folks to take much needed time away to decompress. It's so important for working through stress.
Mm-hmm. What role does faith play in your life, Don?
Oh, wow. After this year, it's played a huge role. I've always been, I've always been responsible to a higher power in that way, and I've leaned so much on my faith through this challenging year. You start things off with a pandemic, and then you have, some individuals in Minneapolis that murdered George Floyd, which caused a wave of distrust for law enforcement that we saw here locally. So we had our officers dealing with that. And then all of the side effects that occurred from the marches and protests and such, where, folks maybe weren't getting some of that important downtime that I was talking about. And I guess for me, having the ability to pray about some of these things, very important for me personally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. What are you reading? Do you have time to read? What are you?
Do peer-reviewed journals count?
I know when you're in the middle of a doctoral program and you have young children and all these things, it's hard to sort of keep ourselves current. But has there been a work that's inspired you, or even a journal or something that you've done that you've thought, this has been helpful, this has helped reshape who I am?
Yeah, so when you first asked the question, like Dr. Seuss came to mind with my kiddos, but
absolutely, I get that.
So between that and a lot of my downtime I do spend studying. But one thing that I've recently read, I'm just finished up a course in the opioid epidemic and learning what other regions are doing to address opioid crisis. And I think one of the main journals that I was looking through in regards to that talked about some of the best practices that law enforcement were utilizing. And, I hope South Dakota never faces the extreme challenges that other locations have. But if they do, I just feel much more prepared here locally in our community to address it. And I also know now where to look to find the answers, because other agencies have had to work through this in a very intense way. And I think it's okay to reach out to them and ask for help instead of recreating the wheel.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm going to let you end on perhaps what your favorite memory was of your time here at Dakota Wesleyan, whether that was football or something that happened in the dorms. I'll let you tell us what that is. But what was your favorite memory while you were here as a student?
I look back at my time in Mitchell at Dakota Wesleyan with just fondness, and I remember all of the super strong friendships that I created, and I think that's part of the benefit of going to somewhat of a smaller school, just those tight bonds that still exist to this day. And also, I know it's still like this, but the staff there were just always so helpful, and you could tell they cared and they wanted to ensure success. So, those two things coupled together just made it such a great experience. And I always think it's kind of fun when you're out and you meet somebody and they say, "Oh, I went to Dakota Wesleyan," and you say, "I did too," and you can almost see it where both parties think back to this positive time in their life. And that's something I'll always hold dear. And I follow Dakota Wesleyan from afar here, and just appreciate all the good things that the school is doing. And like I say, it was just an incredible experience for me.
That's great. Well, Don, we certainly appreciated your time today and the opportunity to visit with you. You make us proud. We're very proud of you as an alum of the university. And I think personally also just really grateful for the progressive insights that you're bringing to policing and the efforts you're engaging in with our American Indian youth and the American Indian population in Rapid City. I mean, it's really been a hallmark, I think, of your tenure and your leadership to do the types of things you're doing and engage in the types of activities you're engaging in. So thank you for your service, especially in a really tough year. And to your colleagues who are in the force with you, we're extraordinarily grateful for what you're doing in Rapid City and the impact that I think that is having across South Dakota and the larger region as a whole. So thank you for being an outstanding alum, and thank you for what you're doing in Rapid City, and we appreciate that. And for all of you who have joined us today, thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about life in the police world and the perspectives of Don Hedrick, who's the Chief of Police of the Rapid City Police Force. We thank Don for his time today and thank all of you for joining us, and we hope that you're able to join us again for another Conversations with President Novak. Have a great holiday season.
Thank you.
Thanks.